So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Our roundtable meeting today was fantastic. It was full of fun, as I think is evidenced by the smiles that you're seeing on our photos that were showed. But we do want to bring it back to that moment that really sets the work that we do in our hearts and in our homes, and that is when we hear about the experiences of people who have lived through HPV cancer. And so in order to get our Survivor panel underway, I would like to introduce I'd like to introduce Deb Arrindell, Vice President of Health Policy at the American Sexual Health Association. Deb?
So I really appreciate that introduction when someone just says your name. So I spoke, true story, as our panelists come up, I spoke at a national sales meeting for a company, and to introduce me, they had created this slideshow with these shots of me speaking and pictures of me at before Congress, and they played this something music, and as I walked up onto the stage, they started playing Beyonce. Who ruled the world? Girls. Who ruled the world? Girls. I felt so incapable of living up to myself. I swore at that moment I would learn to do the Beyonce bounce, so that if ever I encountered an introduction like that again, I would be completely ready. So you are very fortunate that that was a simple intro. So thank you so much for all being here tonight. It's been a long day. I know that people are tired. And I also know that all of us recognize the importance of lived experiences, of learning from others' experiences, and taking that with us into our hearts, into our minds, and into the work that we do. So before we do our panel, I would like to ask if there are other people in the audience who are experiencing or have experienced an HPV-related cancer. If you are comfortable doing so, would you please stand up? Thank you so much. I mean, I know how challenging and difficult this can be, and we'll be looking forward to hearing about your experiences. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we're just going to have a little discussion. I'll ask them a few questions, and we'll see how it goes. And if there's time left, then you can ask them a few questions too. So one of our panelists right here next to me in this beautiful orange is Cricket Correa, who has the best nickname ever. Cricket is an elementary school teacher in Atlanta. She loves spending time with her children and her grandchildren, and she was diagnosed with stage 1B cervical cancer in 2012. She is incredibly grateful for her early diagnosis and speedy treatment. And she attributes it to a coworker who would not allow her to ignore her health issues after her symptoms did not abate after being treated. This persistence ultimately led her to a biopsy and successful treatment. And today, she's cancer-free and as healthy as she was before her cancer journey, which in itself is to be celebrated. She remains connected with the cancer support community, which provides classes in nutrition and fitness, as well as support and informational groups. She volunteers with the Network of Hope, which connects cancer patients with volunteers who have also faced cancer and embraced their life afterwards. Thank you so much, Cricket. Next to her, we have Kimberly Williams. Kimberly is a recurrent cervical cancer survivor and patient advocate, and is the Chief Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Officer at Cervivor. Kimberly is a social services worker from the greater Houston, Texas area with over 20 years of experience in the field of social services, mentoring, managing, and director, emphasizing the fair treatment, work ethic, and services provided to individuals with intellectual disabilities. She serves as a patient advocate for GenMab and she is the co-chair of the National Roundtable on Cervical Cancer Stigma Work Group. Through her experiences and work with diverse populations, Kimberly works to reduce inequality, reduce gaps, ensure fair treatment, and access to care and aid in ending cervical cancer. Thank you, Kimberly. And also we have with us Tom Bennett. Tom was born and raised in Westport, Connecticut, and enjoyed an active childhood and loved living in a coastal community, not far from New York City. He calls himself a serial entrepreneur. He's participated in a few startups and ultimately found his passion in residential construction. One day in early 2015, while on a business trip, he noticed a lump in his neck while he was shaving, and he figured he'd just been exposed to some dust and had a sinus infection. And it was just another sinus infection. After a challenging couple of months, Tom was diagnosed with stage 4 HPV-positive tongue cancer. His treatment began in early 2015 and lasted for 6 weeks. And so if we fast forward to now, Tom has been cancer-free for 7 years and now lives in, another coastal city near Charleston, South Carolina. Tom is done with his post-treatment screenings and he looks at life differently. He says he's less intense about work, more intense about life, cooks more and walks more and lives more. So thanks in advance to all of you. And I'm going to start with you, Cricket. Can you describe for us, you mentioned that it was a co-worker, an assistant principal that got you to go into diagnostics.
Yeah, I had not been feeling good for about, is my mic not on? Pull it down. How's that? Okay. I had been not feeling well for about 6 months prior to my diagnosis. And, at first I just felt like it was postmenopausal changes and that I was just changing and slowing down and things like that. But when I had gone back to school after summer vacation, things got more intense. And I went to my doctor, had my physical, and they started treating me for a variety of things and had put me on some medication that I had a bad reaction to. So much so that they had to come take me by ambulance to the hospital. And then when I returned to work, I let my administrator know, if I call you to come to my classroom, please come. And she said, no, Cricket, go home. Call your doctor back. I said, I'm going back on the 21st. She said, no, you're not leaving my office until you call and get an appointment sooner. And that's what I did. And that ultimately led within 5 days to my diagnosis because of a series of things that had happened that had changed. And when I had my biopsy, my physical symptoms changed and I felt better already and felt guilty staying home from work because they wouldn't let me come back until things were settled. And this, for me, having been a single mom, was really very different because I worked for many years through not feeling well. And if I didn't go to work, I didn't get paid. And that was my mindset. And so to have someone in my environment that said, no, you must take care of yourself first, really made all the difference in the world.
That's great. Tom, you thought you had a sinus infection. Can you talk about your journey to diagnosis?
Yes, thank you. And actually, I'm honored to be here with two survivors as well, and actually everyone here today. So thanks for having me. I think most of you probably know the frontline portion of the diagnosis is very confusing. For me, I went to a general practitioner who gave me an antibiotic and sent me on my way, and then went to a maxillofacial for another X-ray or something all sort. And so you go through a lot of different phases to try to figure out what is wrong with you. Why do you have this on your neck? And believe it or not, I was actually, because I lived in Connecticut, I thought maybe I had Lyme disease. It was one only swollen lymph node, but I thought that maybe I should go to an infectious disease doctor. And the irony behind that was here he was treating me for like almost 3 weeks to a month. And finally, when I had the CAT scan, the CAT scan basically said from the radiologist that there was a mass at the base of my tongue. That he still said to my wife and I that I don't think you have cancer. Now we know going forward that ultimately the diagnosis at Smilow Cancer Center at Yale, that was the case. But it was not an easy journey because there's not a lot of clear, at least at that point, 2015, there wasn't a lot of clear data or information or ways to get an answer. So for me, I was lucky. I had A, good insurance. B, I had at least some good caretakers that at least guided me through the process, and actually a very passionate dentist who made sure that I was going through all the avenues and making sure the diagnosis. So, with that said, it was challenging, but I had great care since then. So I'll leave it at that.
Kimberly, your journey to diagnosis. Your journey to diagnosis was pretty complicated. Can you share that with us?
Absolutely. So I had some bleeding that wasn't synced up with my cycle, and that was in November of 2017. My friend told me, she said, Kim, you need to go to the doctor, see what's going on. So I had a pap smear, came back irregular. My physician said, don't worry about it. It probably will clear up itself. Come back in 3 months. I went back in 3 months. I had a biopsy. And he looked at me and he said, there's a problem. He called me in a week and he said, kiddo, you have cervical cancer. I was 42 at the time. I know I look fantastic. So March 5th, I had a radical hysterectomy and I thought, okay, this is how life is gonna go and that's fine. My surgeon oncologist said everything went well. There were some cancerous cells on the outside of my cervix. He said, I think you need some maintenance, chemo and radiation. We'll get that done. It'll be fine. My insurance refused to pay for an additional scan to see where the cancer may be. So it took about a year for me to actually get one scan that they would pay for. And at that time, the cancer had moved to the other side of my body, and now I'm at stage 3 and require aggressive radiation and chemo treatment. So in August of 2019, I dropped my children off at school, and I went to my first day of radiation and chemo treatment. And this was the worst feeling of my life because I had what I felt like was good insurance. I had Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm a working director. I went through so many different emotions going through that. And going through radiation and chemo was a very difficult time for me. Any diagnosis is different. It's difficult, cancer diagnosis, but definitely going through radiation and chemo. And I didn't know a lot of things. The physician didn't share with me that I had an HPV cancer. I was just told I had cervical cancer, not until I got involved with Survivor that I knew, oh, wait, let me go look back at my documentation, and sure enough, HPV was on there. My oncologist was not preparing me for what was coming next. So it was very difficult for me. She wasn't sharing information with me. I didn't know I was gonna get a port in my neck. I didn't know any of this information. She just said, you're gonna have a minor surgery. I get in for surgery and she's like, hey, you're gonna have a tube in your jugular vein. I'm like, what? Wait, what? What's that? And why am I having it? So I literally had to tell my chemo oncologist, can you speak to me like I've never had cancer before? So 6 weeks of treatment. blood transfusions, all those different things that I had to go through. But I did ring the bell in October of 2019, signifying that I was complete with chemo and radiation. And I had my clear scan in December of 2019, and I've been clear ever since.
So, Tom, you ended up in a clinical trial. Were you were the medications they were treating you with not working, or how did you end up in a clinical trial, and what was that experience like?
No, good question. You know, just like your situation, you've been told you have cancer and all the things around you, get your stuff in order, go to the dentist and the fluoride treatments and all the stuff in front of you, and then all of a sudden one day they say, hey, there's a clinical trial available. We can actually reduce your cisplatin radiation by 1 week. And I said, well, that sounds good. And they said, and they give you a big stack of papers, we'll fill it out. So ultimately, my clinical trial was 1 less week of treatment. And being part of the Head and Neck Cancer Alliance, I do have the opportunity of mentoring other men that go through the type of treatment. And I didn't really realize until recently when I helped somebody go through treatment how much more difficult that last week really is. The extra week of cisplatin, which definitely damaged my kidney and definitely damages your organs, but it's part of the process, that, and then the additional 5 radiation treatments. So ultimately, I'm thankful that I was accepted in that trial and I completed it. I think it was a Washington State trial. And so fortunately for me, it now, I think in the part of the process is that there's going to be less leathering in my neck and less complications maybe with the swallowing as it goes in the future. But that basically is the trial that I was in.
It's quite an experience. So, Cricket, you mentioned that I think you have a slew of grandchildren, you lucky woman. Can I borrow them sometimes? That would be great. And children, how did this affect your family?
Yeah, I was very fortunate because my children were grown. I had raised them as a single mom. My youngest was 4 when I got divorced, and I had worked as a waitress for those years. I didn't start teaching till I was 40, about 10 years before I was diagnosed with cancer. And so in the time that I was a waitress, I worked literally cash to cash. Each day I brought home cash, and that was our money, and moved jobs to have health insurance that was really inadequate. So getting diagnosed while I had insurance was really, really profound for me. On top of that, my children then were grown, but it's an imbalance when you're a single parent with your children. And as they grow, they're concerned about caring for you. And I'm still single. And so my daughter had just had her second child. She was 3 months when I was diagnosed, and my daughter had returned to work about 3 weeks before I was diagnosed. My son was a newlywed and had lost his grandmother, her mother to breast cancer, and her grandparents in the first year of their marriage. And my other son was getting established. And the thought of being a burden to them was, I can't compare it to taking your children to school, but it was terrifying. The thought that I would be a burden to them, or that I would add more sorrow to my daughter-in-law's, especially my daughter-in-law's loss. And so even though I was self-sufficient, it was a real challenge. And as I say, I just constantly, when I'd go to the oncologist office and I'd see these young women there, literally I would say, there but for the grace of God go I, a phrase my mom used to say, like, how fortunate am I that I was diagnosed later in life, that I'd already had my children, and that they were established. And then I just worked to make sure I was surrounded by a network that could support me so that I could help my children to process what was going on rather than ask them to help me process. And so I was just really thankful for that maturity in our relationships.
It's really interesting that you describe this as being fortunate. We were doing a prep call, and Cricket was saying that, I understand that my journey was not as difficult as some other people's, and mine was only this. And Kimberly said, wait, you had cancer. There's no only associated with cancer. There's no just associated with cancer. And I think that's really important. And I still hear that reflected in how you describe your experience. But your experience is your experience, and it was important for you. We're always protecting other people, right? We're always protecting someone else, even at the time that we're struggling very often. Kimberly, tell me a little bit about your journey. How did this affect you and your life and all of that process? What was that like for you?
Ooh,
Do you feel that it changed you in any fundamental way?
well, absolutely. When I was diagnosed in 2018, I was married. And not that my marriage didn't come with its own set of challenges, but I was married at the time. But it did change my mindset. And I think sometimes when you are faced with certain things, it makes you look at things a little bit differently. So for me, I made a decision that, okay, I'm going to end something that is causing me stress. So with my journey came different things. So in November of 2018, I was divorced. In April, the first part of April of 2019, I lost my job. The end of April, but the end of April, that's when I finally got my scan. And I was able to get treatment. So it was so many different pockets of things, and just listening to the fact that Tom was able to get a clinical trial that was never offered to me. So, and I heard someone else say last week that went to my same hospital that didn't look like me. They were offered a clinical trial at the same time that I was receiving treatment, but I didn't. It was never offered to me. So I didn't even know. And I know you may hear me say Survivor quite a bit, but that's where I got information from. And I never had heard of a clinical trial at all. I didn't even know what it was because it was never offered. Nothing was ever told to me. And after being involved with Survivor and understanding what the HPV vaccine, if I could say this portion real quickly, before I was diagnosed, I took my son to the doctor, and his pediatrician asked me, do you want him to have the HPV vaccine? I said, does he need it? She said, no, not really. So I didn't get it. Fast forward, I'm diagnosed with the HPV-related cancer, and now I'm like, what the? Like, you didn't want to tell me it was it was cancer prevention? So, I mean, it's that type of thing, and that's one of the reasons why I advocate. That's one of the reasons why I share my story. Because if you are not aware, and if physicians are not sharing this information with what we call lay people, then they're not making those decisions. So that's how important you all are, right? In sharing this information with patients, so your friends, your family, and touching those people. Because if I didn't have literally Survivor where I could read information and find information, I would have never known. I would have never known.
Tom, talk to us a little bit about your journey and whether or not, in what ways you think this may have changed you.
Good question, too. I do have to say that in comparison to the other two women here, that I was very fortunate that I had a very good caretaker, my wife, to make sure that I was there. So I really sympathize with the fact of what both of you went through, of being a single person going through that. Because part of the treatment obviously is doing it, but the other part is just having somebody there to support you. So it's important that if you meet somebody that's going through treatment, just make sure they have somebody kind of supportive. That's my hallmark moment for a second. But I do like to tell stories, and I shared with Eileen from the Head and Neck Cancer Alliance the story today. And I know there's mostly women here, so there's not many golfers here, but it's a true story and a valid story. And are you a golfer?
In my dreams, I do.
Okay. Well, fair enough. But it's funny, you know. I lost my train of thought. So anyway, all I want to do, like, when you're going through treatment, you just want to get to the end. But people also, I think you're going to know, you are the sickest at the end, right? And so it's really 2 weeks, maybe past the chemo But I had a mission that I was going to play golf. And so it was January. It was South Carolina. It was still a little chilly. And I said, you know what? I'm going to put my golf shoes on. I'm going to go play golf. And for those of you that don't know golf, there's long holes, which are par fives, and there's short holes that are par threes. And so as I was playing by myself, I came up on a group. It was 2 boys and the father. And they said, hey, come on, why don't you play with us? You can kind of play through. I said, no, I'm just here to walk and play golf. No, please, go ahead. So as I proceeded to go up the tee, I brought my big wood, my 3-wood, which you don't normally use on a par 3, but that day I knew I needed the driver because I was very, very weak. And I got up to the tee and I hit the ball. And I told the boys after I hit the ball, I said, I'll tell you the rest of the story when we get on the green. So I hit the ball. Unfortunately, the ball went on the green, and we all took our carts up and we got up there. And I told them at that point that I had just gone through cancer treatment, and that both the boys had an opportunity with a vaccine available that they might want to consider getting that vaccine, and telling the father. So hopefully, I can tell you that. But on the flip side of that, this one may even shock you, that my son, who's 33, has still yet to have the vaccine. He saw me in the cancer chair. He drove me to chemo a couple times, but never wanted to partake in that. My daughter did. You can't make people do things, but it was good that there was some data today that maybe he can still go get a shot or a 1 dose or whatever it is. So with that said, that's my journey, and hopefully that makes sense. And I'll take you golfing anytime you want. And you too, Cricket.
So Cricket, when you're off the golf course, can you tell us a little bit about your work with the cancer support community in Atlanta? You said that.
Yeah, my sister actually ended up coming to take care of me. And after my hysterectomy, before we knew stage or anything like this, literally we went straight to the cancer support community, which is across from Northside Hospital here in Atlanta. And so close to my home and a great resource. And again, being single, I said, I need to go and get resources. They helped with so many things. And in fact, the first oncologist that I visited, we were not comfortable with. My daughter and I had gone together. Just experience was not what it should have been, and had been recommended by my gynecologist, and she was shocked. But I said, there's absolutely no way that I'll go to this oncologist. She did the hysterectomy. And so after the surgery, we went, and it happened that at the interview for intake, a woman was there that also had cervical cancer and was in love with her oncologist. Aww. And recommending, because cancer support community can't recommend. And so they see all kinds of cancers. There were 5 people there, and 2 of us had cervical cancer. She recommended her oncologist. I made an appointment for the next day, but the cancer support community has been an incredible resource to me. And whether you're single or you're not single, the importance of these community networks is incredible, and it's from every level, from exercise classes to nutrition to all-out support groups and information. They work to inform people that work in the medical profession as well as us. And then I'm able to volunteer through Network of Hope. And that's another comfort, because cancer, even when we're cancer-free, we're never cancer-free. Like our life was changed in a way that you go to the doctor and for some random reason you're going for your physical, and that memory comes back of one day I was doing this and then it was that. And it comes back, and to have others who have lived through the experience in your network is very, very powerful. And so as much as we advocate for vaccines, for underserved populations, to speak to the issues that go on, forming those communities and those networks of someone who has lived the experience is so important for us, as for me personally as a survivor. But when I work with other people who have experienced cancer, no matter how much caregiving you have, no matter how much support you have, that being able to talk to someone who's experienced it is so powerful.
Absolutely. I can imagine that that's the case. Tom, we don't hear a lot from men. We're just now moving into doing a better job, I think all of us, of including men in our storytelling and in our advocacy. Can you talk about this a little bit from a man's perspective, and other than the golf course, maybe, how?
You mean this is a man's world? Oh, I was just.
Wait a minute.
I was gonna, no, I'm just not. You know, if I took the question, I kind of twisted a little bit. I mean, sometimes there might be a stigma because of the diagnosis that I had, but I never really took it. I think I was always forefront that if people asked me what kind of cancer I had, I always kind of shared it. More importantly, about the fact of going through some screening process, especially, all of a sudden I got a buddy that calls me up, hey, I heard you had cancer. What kind of cancer you have? Oh yeah, what do I got? So making sure that people have good information to make good evaluations. I think also really more in a friendly friends environment. I had a lot of people with children at that point which were vaccination age, to make sure that they knew that the vaccine was available and to encourage them to at least research it out and do all that. So, for me, I never really felt intimidated by it, even though, people, it's kind of hushed under the rug a little bit regarding HPV, but I kind of took it more of an opportunity to kind of champion the opportunity to make sure that people are aware of, again, because sometimes, especially when it comes to that one swollen lymph node and that difficulty in the diagnosis process, is just making sure that people were aware of it. And if they had any questions, and in fact, it just came to me that there was a mutual friend that somebody had gone through diagnosis, and just even being able to talk to someone, which happens quite a bit, and kind of mentor through that. So hopefully that kind of answers that. But I think with all of these HPV-related cancers, the ones like us that are here, we're kind of advocates of getting the message out there. But I think there are way more people who don't want to talk about it, who want to put it in the closet. And that's a personal decision that we really can't comment on. But I wish, and thankful for these forums and these opportunities to kind of share the journey, and making sure that you all leave there today saying, you know what, we've got a good mission, you're all doing good work, so thank you.
Kimberly Cricket. Did either of you have any issues with stigma? I know that you're co-chairing the Stigma Roundtable for the coalition, I keep saying coalition, the Roundtable. You're co-chairing the Roundtable Stigma Work Group. And I don't know if either of you experienced any stigma you want to talk to us about.
You gonna let me go? Yeah. Okay. Originally, I did not. And probably why is because I felt like I was the only person in the world that had cervical cancer. I know it sounds crazy, but that's really what I felt like. And I never heard of cervical cancer before. I didn't know anyone that had cervical cancer. So I think I was just a little lost in it. There was probably one thing that happened. I'll share it because, it's just between us. One thing that happened with my ex-husband, when he did look up cervical cancer and he saw that it was when I found out that it was derived from HPV, and he looked it up, and he was like, you nasty. You've been messed around. And I'm like, okay, but you know you're for the streets, so I'm not understanding. But so I kind of went through that, but that was at home, and I kind of took care of that myself. But won't tell you what I said. But but I honestly, I never took it. I never took it as I did something wrong. And I think some of that had a lot to do with the messaging that I saw, just even when because I didn't say a lot of things in Survivor because it's online and it's support. I didn't say a lot of things, but I looked at the messaging. And so I felt comfort in knowing I'm not the only one. I'm not alone. There are other people. This is normal. And I think that helped me walk through my diagnosis without feeling stigmatized.
That's excellent.
I'll answer in a different way. And I wasn't expecting this question, so what I
Sorry.
say might make sense to you. It might not make sense to you because this is probably the first that I'm saying it to anyone beside my sister. I'm divorced because my ex-husband was a sexual deviant. And I had chronic infections for years while I was married to him, to the point that I thought I might be allergic to his sperm. And my mother would go on tirades that he was going to kill me, either through the abuse, but through sexually transmitted diseases. When I was diagnosed, they first thought it was endometrial cancer. And then they came back and said it was cervical, which I knew immediately was HPV. But where I dealt with an issue was when the doctor, and he would come with me to the doctor's appointments because there was a tremendous amount of control. And when I went to the doctors, at one point I said, why am I getting all of these infections? And he said, because it's dark and moist down there. And I said, well, every woman is dark and moist down there.
Right.
And so when I was first diagnosed with cervical cancer, and she called back and said it was cervical cancer, there was a real drain inside of me of, even I was divorced over almost 20 years. 20 years later, you can still get to me. And that was a real emotional challenge for me to get past. And you know, I have my own things too. And you come to that after you get through the emotion of it, and you're like, no, I'm not going to give him that power over me. But it took a process to do that. And so it is very different, I think, when you are working with men or women with HPV, because you do have to take that piece of a person's life into account, and that voice. And honestly, it's just making that awareness. And the one thing that I want to take from cancer, the one change that I really want to take from it, is I want to be LaTarsha Jones, the woman that saw me in her office and could see through and say, there's something going on with you, and you must find out what it is. Trust yourself, trust your instincts. And whether you're a doctor, whether you're a social worker, whether you're a teacher, whether you're on a golf course, we all have people in our lives that we see, and we got to take that time to look and to say, what's going on? There's something more there. And so it wasn't a stigma that somebody put on me, but it truly was something that came inside and kind of adds to the emotion of this disease.
We really appreciate you sharing that here. This is a safe space. This is a safe space to share that, and we, we really appreciate that. I know that was very hard.
Important to know, from every level of not telling, of no, this vaccine is not important, or this scan is important, it's got to be done, or, just you have an opportunity to push the envelope sometimes and trust that instinct to push the envelope for that person that you see in front of you.
Kimberly, you participated in the community conversations process as part of this roundtable. ACS held a number of focus groups and also created a process of community conversations that were facilitated by people like Kimberly. And I'm just wondering if in those community, what kinds of things did you hear in those community conversations? This just that process, what kinds of conversations were you having, and was that meaningful for you?
It definitely was meaningful for me. I think because it helped to see things from a different lens. And what it did show me is that all cervical cancer patients or survivors have the same thought process. Like, how can we keep this from happening to someone else? And so it's diving deep into those issues that are happening. There were a lot of discussion about access, fears of being diagnosed, fears of actually going to the doctor, fears of going back and receiving treatment. It was very interesting. I know a couple stories was like they would talk to their friends and their friends would have an abnormal pap and they refused to go back to the doctor because they did not want to know what was going on. And it was a scary fear of somebody's going to think I'm dirty, someone is going to think I did something wrong. And so they would rather wait and not actually be treated. So, but the main song I would say is that we all wanted the same thing, which is to eliminate or reduce cervical cancer as we know it.
Is there anything else that you think is important for us to know before we wrap up?
Me?
Anybody?
Don't believe anything you read on the internet. It'll scare you for sure, especially if you are, in my case, diagnosed. And if I remember the story, and I was sharing it today, that when I was told to go see one of these two doctors, and I came home from being away, and there was a packet from the cancer center there with a big book, and I didn't know if I was HPV positive or negative at that point. I was just at that point knew I needed to see one of these doctors. Was that, it's so hard to get good information, like you mentioned, is getting good advice, getting good doctors that know what they're talking about. And so with that said, it's how do you get that message to the people? So for me, even today, if I got some other situation going on in my life health-wise, which not the case, but I'm just saying, whether it's a sore, like it was actually today, all of a sudden, 7 years out, radiation aside, if all of a sudden I get a toothache, now am I worried that I have to have some teeth removed? I don't know. So I don't go to the internet with that anymore. Like the oncologist told me back then, you know what, Tom, just wait a few days, wait a week and see if the symptom goes away. If it does, then you'll be okay. But with that said, I think there's a lot of misinformation, I think, on the internet. So it should be duly noted that not to just to think that that's the absolute source of information, more likely the healthcare provider that you trust. So I'll defer it.
I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you for all that you do in whatever capacity that you're working toward eradicating HPV, treating HPV, preventing HPV cancers. And I am incredibly grateful for the care that I got and the resources that I have access to here in Atlanta. And keep fighting for access, it is stark for me to consider what my diagnosis would have been or my treatment would have been as a single mom working as a waitress and what it was having health insurance through the school board. And I don't lose sight of that for 1 second because I still watch families in the community that I serve where mamas just don't have access to the care that they need.
I have two things to say. One to cervical cancer patients, survivors, your story matters. Your story matters. And if you tell one person, if it's telling your family, your friends, your sister, your cousin, that could change someone else's life. So don't be afraid to tell your story. And the second would be to clinicians, take your time when treating or just communicating with HPV-related cancer patients. Sharing information. Remember, the patient really does not know. And sometimes rushing through that information makes it difficult for them to grasp next steps.
Thank you all so, so much. It's so good. So this is the part where I'm supposed to do this summation, where I pull it all together and help you all understand how it connects to the work that you do, how it connects to educating providers and patients, and why it's important to work on stigma. But you guys already know all of that, and just hearing this does not require me to pull it together. So I'm going to steal the microphone and do two things. One of them is I want to thank Tamika Felder, who, when she was, how old, Tamika? When she was a baby girl, recently diagnosed, was one of the first women that I ever worked with from whom I heard cervical cancer stories and kind of lived through her journey. And I appreciate it every time I see her healthy and beautiful again. So thank you, Tamika. I also want to acknowledge and thank the organizations in the room who are supporting survivors. I know there's some people here from Team Marine. Please stand up. I know Lillian's here from the HPV Alliance. Please stand up if you're still here. I know Selena's here from the National Cervical Cancer Coalition. Please stand up. And I think someone from St. Jude, is that right? Heather from St. Jude, please stand up. So the work that you do to help survivors not feel alone, not feel lonely, to feel supported is extraordinarily important. I've got about 2 minutes before I break into tears, so I'm just going to say thank you all so much for your patience. Thank you again so much for all that you have shared with us, and thank you all for the work that you do. Let's keep doing yours in the struggle.